Thanks for tuning in to another Mornings with Monty. We do this on a monthly basis. We have a different topic every month that we want to feature. And today we're going to talk about small business in all of its forms. Our ecosystems have changed because of COVID-19. We've all been impacted. Here in Chattanooga, we have the fastest, best internet platform on the planet. And so a lot of our tech companies are trying to navigate this. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But we're also going to talk about Main Street this morning. For the purposes of this episode, because we have three great guests, we're going to spotlight the four of us. And then after about 45 minutes of conversation, I'd like to open it up to Q&A. If you have a question that you would like answered and you don't necessarily want to ask it, please feel free to put it in the chat and we will address that as well. So without further ado, let's get to it. I'd like to welcome our panelists today. First, Jim Roberts is joining us from Wilmington, North Carolina. Jim, you're pretty much the guru of the Wilmington entrepreneurship ecosystem, as I understand it. You're the founder of Wilmington Angels for Local Entrepreneurs, as well as the network for entrepreneurs there. So I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about that in a minute. We also have Margaret Collins joining us from Winston-Salem. Good morning, Margaret. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine. Thank you.
Margaret is the founder of the Center for Creative Economy. And as the name implies, she's about all things creative. And she's going to talk to us a bit about the importance of creativity. Finally, there's Leslie Scott. Now, Leslie and I were on a panel during Startup Week in Chattanooga together. And I became totally intrigued by what Leslie is doing. She is a specialist in entrepreneurship, ecosystem, and strategy. But she's got this program, 100 Days for Small Business, that I really, really love. And I hope it's something that we'll get to do in Chattanooga. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Morning.
So Jim, you have a local focus in Wilmington, finding capital in your own backyard. I know that a lot of entrepreneurs spend a lot of time traipsing all over the country, making pitches and trying to attract capital. And at the same time, I talk to affluent investors here in Chattanooga who feel like they don't know how to become investors. They don't know how to get into that ecosystem. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing in Wilmington.
So first and foremost, I want to make clear that I am personally not an investor, but I manage the process between the entrepreneurs and the angel investors that I do have. I have a very small network of angel investors, and we're trying to be the first money in, if you will. As you said, I run the ecosystem. I run a nonprofit where we have monthly events and non-COVID months, of course, where we actually have the second highest attendance of any startup entrepreneur event in the state of North Carolina, which, as you know, is a very much a pro-business state. And if I were a betting man, I would guess that we have the same challenge that you have, is that we have two dominant economies in North Carolina. We have Raleigh and we have Charlotte, and then everyone else kind of behind that, because those are the two biggest cities. And so what's unique about what I do is, since I run the ecosystem and I have an angel network, I can see the entrepreneurs coming through the process, and I can pick out the best ones, make sure that they're good at follow through, and put them in front of our small group of angel investors. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find the validation points of what makes a startup a good company. And if I have conservative investors, can I get outside validation? So can I nominate my companies for awards on a statewide basis? Can I get them on pitch contests on a statewide basis? And How can I help connect them to the resources that are in Raleigh, Durham that they can't find locally? And if they get some mentor help from a Raleigh Durham mentor that is known as being successful, can I use that to attract more local money? And those are some of the ways that I have been working within to not only get the local investors more excited, but if I can find a local investor, that makes it much more likely that they can find an outside investor. Because if a Raleigh Durham investor looks at our deals, and the first thing they're going to think is, well, why hasn't somebody from Wilmington invested? That's a real big red flag.
So that sounds like your basic chicken and egg dilemma.
Correct.
You know, who's going to jump into the pool first? I know that I always say that we need to have some key investors all hold hands, stand on the edge of the pool, and all jump in at the same time. That gives everybody the best outcome. I would say here in Chattanooga, if we don't have one of our key early stage investors already putting money into a deal, it's really hard to attract everybody else. But then if you get one of those people, then everyone wants to be in the club. So I always say that what we need here is really more outside investors, because we have the same people validating the same kinds of companies, the same kinds of strategies over and over again. And I think we need a little bit more diversity. Are you finding that to be the case in Wilmington?
Oh, very much so.
Uh-oh. Looks like Jim is frozen up.
Probably be back.
Margaret,
Well,
can you hear me?
I can brag on something that Jim does too in Wilmington.
Okay,
And
let's go
just
ahead.
to keep up the Wilmington thread until he comes back.
Okay.
So he also has really good relationships with the big business media in North Carolina, including WRAL and probably Business North Carolina Magazine. And that's another place that a lot of executives read, and or a publication that a lot of people read. And so if your local community is skeptical about how cool one of your local companies is, having them featured in Business North Carolina or Triangle Business Journal or in any of the regional business journals, it's a huge feather in their cap because everybody reads that. And so anyway, back to you, Jim. I was just bragging on how sometimes your media relationships can really help your local companies build that credibility with investors as well.
Yeah, so I really focus on outside media. So I write for Dig South out of Charleston, South Carolina. And I've written for them so much, there's now a Wilmington only section of their website.
Oh, wow.
I write for, I just wrote an article for Atlanta. They have their own startup news called Hippopotamus, which you guys should know because they've written an article on your ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of writing because our local media doesn't cover much business news. And I'm trying to kind of spark that change by getting good readership on my articles. Here's another example. In Raleigh, there's a website called GrepBeat, GREPBEAT, grepbeat.com. And they only write about Raleigh. But they approached me and said, we'd like you to do a postcard from Wilmington about your ecosystem. And I wrote that article. It was the 7th most read article in Raleigh of the year. And it was about Wilmington. So, you know, much like you guys have, you have a magnet, you have the gigabit internet, but you also have a beautiful place to live. If I open these curtains behind me, you would see the intercoastal waterway and you would see boats and that is our magnet,
Mm-hmm.
is the ocean. So we're trying to use every asset that we have, and I'm certainly trying to make more people aware of Wilmington, especially as people leave the big cities like Atlanta and New York and Boston.
So it's interesting that you say that, Jim. I have a good friend, Tom Barkin, who's president of the Richmond Federal Reserve Bank. And they've done a lot of work about the competitiveness of mid-sized cities. And Tom says that cities are going to have to identify what their natural competitive advantages are and quit trying to replicate and copy one another and just do the same things. Because going forward, what we uniquely do, what we're uniquely good at, is what's going to lead to the success, particularly of mid-sized and smaller cities. So really interesting.
But I want to make clear is that we had one of the most beautiful co-working spaces you will ever see, top notch. The furniture was more than, my car is worth. And it was a mile from the beach, but not one company ever relocated into that office space just because of that. They thought it would be all that would be a magnet to attract and recruit other companies. And the fact is it never worked. And the work that I'm doing to promote success stories within our ecosystem is actually much more successful because, as I put in an email to you, if other entrepreneurs read about the success of your companies, you've got that proven methodology that you can take a company from ideation to exit. So we've had 4 exits in our local ecosystem within the last year. One was an IPO with a company called Encino, and one was a private equity acquisition, and 2 smaller acquisitions. And that's what the entrepreneurs are looking for is, how do I cash out if I start this company at an idea, but I hold 50% of the equity or 10% of the equity? I want that big payout at the end of the 5 to 7 years. And we've now proven that we can do that within our ecosystem.
Wow, that's incredible. Let's move over to Winston-Salem here. And Margaret, I love that you have built this ecosystem based on creativity. Excuse me, I can't talk this morning. Tell us a little bit about the Center for Creative Economy and what you're doing in Winston-Salem.
Thank you, Monty. I'm happy to. So yes, I'm the founder of the Center for Creative Economy. We are based here in Winston, and Winston-Salem, as you may know, is the city of arts and innovation. So culture and creativity has been embedded in our community since it was founded. We are the home of the UNC School of the Arts, which is the only state-supported conservatory in the country. And we produce an amazing amount of talent every year in the creative arts. We're also the home of 4 other major universities: Wake Forest, Salem College, Winston-Salem State, and Forsyth Tech. And so so creativity is really embedded in here. So as a musician myself, I met artists and creatives that were struggling to make a living, and they communicated their art and their design and their culinary abilities beautifully, but their momentum broke down when it came to their forecasting, marketing, and sales. So they really couldn't cross that divide. So there was really a bridge missing. So we created the CCE because I have a passion for people and making connections where they are broken. And I really wanted to help creative entrepreneurs complete that circle and become strong. So I founded the CCE to really enable creatives to launch sustainable businesses. And creative industries in our country is a $700 billion industry. And in North Carolina, it's around 200 to 300 million. And we are really interested in continuing that and making it grow. And there are very limited resources for creative businesses, but it could be so much stronger if we focused on them. And we define creative as, it's pretty broad, anything design related, interactive, education, tech, music, culinary, anywhere basically art, design, and technology meet in order to build a business. Some of our businesses are more mainstream, some are more tech enabled and have an ability to scale very fast. But the beauty in Winston-Salem is that we really have an interconnected ecosystem. I work at CCE. We work in the early stages of entrepreneurial development. We're focused on inception stage growth, helping them from everything from the idea all the way to launch. And we have 3 different ways of doing that. We have a boot camp, which is a 4-week kinetic, we call it kinetic boot camp, which really takes you from idea through your early stage prototype. Then we have our monthly meetups called Momentum, which is a gathering of creatives and it's ideation and networking to help people connect and further their ideas and their businesses. And then our signature program is Velocity, which is a 9-week, a very intense business accelerator, which culminates in a $50,000 seed stage investment that CCE makes in 3 companies. So but we don't take any equity in those companies. It's all, we're a nonprofit and we do it through donations.
Okay.
But we really believe in building our businesses, building our creative businesses so that we can have a really innovative and diverse fabric of life here in our community.
Well, here in Chattanooga, we have an area that we call our Innovation District. And we like to talk about creating collisions between companies and entrepreneurs. But when you're not sector specific, sometimes it's hard to get companies to see what they have in common, to really have that communication. So do you find that to be a challenge at CCE because you're not sector specific? Do the creatives recognize the creativity in one another?
Oh, absolutely. And not only that, we find creatives from all over the country and globally that are attracted to our program because creatives kind of bond together around creativity and the fact that they are using their artisanal skills, their art, design, music to create. Basically, we're teaching them how to find a problem in the world and solve it using your creative skills. It's not a soft business development kind of project. They still have to go through the same lean startup methodology, find the problem, solve it, customer discovery, business model development that any other accelerator would go into. And in fact, we are attracting people from other parts of the country. And our Velocity program this year, we had startups from Seattle, Cleveland, Philadelphia, Kansas City, and France and Spain. And in our boot camp we're running right now, we have teams of course, we had teams from Winston-Salem in our Velocity too, and North Carolina. In our current kinetic boot camp, we have a team for Berlin, as well as teams from Winston-Salem. And in fact, 2 of those companies, one from Boston and one from New Delhi, India, have now moved to Winston-Salem because of the resources they found in our program. And it's not just the curriculum and training that CCE provides. We also have over 30 plus mentors that come and work with us year round, and they are the secret sauce of our programs. They provide that connectivity, that thread, that the business expertise that helps the startups, really make it real.
So what has been the big surprise for you at CCE? What advantage have you seen come out of the program that you weren't necessarily anticipating?
Well, I have to say, it's very challenging to do what we do because not all these companies are ready for investment right away, and we're training them to go and be successful and to potentially work with one of Jim's angel investors or the angel investors here in our community. But they are, because they are smaller and maybe more internally focused, it takes them a little longer to get to those stages where they're ready for investment. But that's good because what we're training them to do is customers, and they get their traction, they get customers, and then it usually happens within 2 to 3 years. They have a good track record with customers, and then they're able to go and seek investment if they need it. Sometimes our startups can actually bootstrap in and go all the way to a successful whether it's exit or just successful, viable business without seeking investors.
Mhm. So because your companies aren't necessarily, ready for investment anytime soon, how do you define success? I mean, how do you know that what you're doing is working and that you're headed in the right direction?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, we define success based on they've learned how to grow their business. They have confidence. They have access to mentors. We rate them on a scale of knowledge learned, and all of them increase their knowledge in all the various business skills, whether it's business model development, financial forecasting, access to mentors, and and then jobs created. And we do rate them every year. We have surveys that get sent out on revenue. What is your revenue that you've earned this year? And then what investment have you raised? So to date, we have now launched 50 companies out of our program. 90% are thriving, still in business, which is well above the average. They have earned, I think it's 8.4 million in revenue and 7.2 million in investment. And we're very proud that about 50% are women, and about this year, 50% were people of color. So our programs are attracting a very wide demographic of people, people of color, all kinds of women, and we are geographically diverse too.
What's your relationship like with Wake Forest and the other universities in the area? Is there a pipeline between the universities and CCE?
Well, we are based in the 500 West 5th Street building, which is a building that one of our major leaders, Don Flo, purchased, and every floor is has entrepreneurial focus. Of course, his businesses are in the top floors, and then we have a pipeline program. It's an incubator called Winston Starts. They're on the 4th and 5th floor. I'm based out of Flywheel, which is a co-working space on the 8th floor. And then our universities all collaborate on the 3rd floor. So Wake Forest, Salem, Winston-Salem State, and UNC School of the Arts, and even one of the private high schools have offices on the 3rd floor. So that's where their entrepreneurial activities take place. So we partner with those people a lot. And so we have a very collaborative relationship with both the School of the Arts and with Salem, and we actually host our programs out of the 3rd floor. So we have a lot more space to run programs and bring mentors in and that kind of thing. But I will say we work very closely with the universities. We try to interest their students to come into coming in. Our entire ecosystem does, and I would say I'm just one of many in Winston-Salem that we're a strong ecosystem. Winston Starts is an incubator that hosts businesses for up to 2 years after they go through an accelerator. So we have a really good pipeline in that once they come through our program, Winston Starts comes and they come and visit, they talk to our startups, and then they have it's called the Explore program, and you have to apply and then be accepted, but we now have 30% of their startups in the Winston Starts are from our CCE programs. So then they get a runway into the next step. So that's what we say. We're early stage. We get them vetted and ready to roll, business models fleshed, customers figured out, value proposition, and then we can get them into Winston Starts. Winston Starts monitors, mentors, and helps them with their investment if they want to seek investment.
That's awesome. Leslie, let's talk a little bit about small business in general and what you're doing. I think all across our country, small businesses do the heavy lifting of our economy. They create jobs. They keep the wheels turning everywhere. But it's not sexy, and they don't always get the resources and the love that I think they deserve. So when I heard about your program, 100 Days for Small Business Support, it really excited me. So can you tell us a little bit about what it is you do in general and about 100 Days in particular?
Sure, I'm happy to be here. I've worked all over North Carolina as well as several other metro markets in Virginia and Tennessee and Kentucky and Georgia. So that's where I bring my perspective. I I do focus on the inside out approach to economic development, where a community looks at what's already working and growing, not just by sector, but by age of the owner, by race and other demographics, and says, where do we have strengths and momentum in our entrepreneurial community, and how can we help some of those people take the next steps to connect to their regional supply chains of what's already growing in their regional economy that they may not even be tapped into. So that's what I mean by strategy at the community level of kind of what are we already good at. But many economic development consultants help you figure out who to recruit. And what I more do is help you figure out how to get in the supply chains of some regional leaders that are already in some of your industries, so that you're working from momentum that's already there, and not trying to really push the ball uphill. Because like you were talking about, all of you earlier, the smaller metro regions are going to be at a disadvantage as it is. And the smaller towns maybe even more so. And so I've always taken kind of a regional approach. I love that article that Jim wrote about how a basketball program is similar to a startup ecosystem. While I didn't have a whole lot to do with it, except as a taxpayer, I would like to tell a story about Durham, North Carolina, because it's at the top of the startup lists. And I've lived here for about 35 years. There was a time when there was an opportunity to build something called the American Tobacco Complex out of an actual functioning tobacco factory that hadn't closed but a few years before, but had already turned into a brownfield. And the taxpayers had a bond referendum along the way somewhere to put some public money into the renovation of that property. And the taxpayer said no, because nobody had articulated a vision to what it was going to actually be. We did have some Duke basketball players. Here's the tie-in for Jim, but we had some Duke basketball players, Christian Leitner in one of his cohort, that said, we'd be happy to invest in something called Blue Devil Ventures and help startups and create kind of a more of a startup community in Durham. Well, Durham was nowhere near that being like a goal for the next few years, because they had a brownfield building that was completely unusable. And it wasn't until a local investor, the Goodman family, which owns the Durham Bulls and Capital Broadcasting, put almost $1,900,000 into the building for pigeon guano removal. And after the brownfield was cleaned up, then all the other money rushed in, including the taxpayers' money, to finish the creation of Durham as the ecosystem giant that it may be now. But it had a lot of stumbles along the way and did some really dumb things, like put the jail right in the gateway, a tall white building that looks exactly like a jail, right from the highway. But since then, they had the sense to build some other buildings in front of it, so they blocked its, prominence in the view. But to be honest, what Durham did the best, besides leverage local money to attract outside money as well, is the older generation, my generation, passed the torch a bit. The chamber hired somebody who was like 24. When Adam Klein joined the Durham Chamber, he was really young, and they took a chance on him, and he became good friends with Jim Goodman's son, and the two of them started talking to everybody they knew about how to make Durham cooler, and the older adults kind of gave them a lot of leash to help them do that. But so I'm kind of bragging on Durham, even though I didn't have a whole lot to do with it, because what I saw was leadership trying to do things that didn't really work. And then eventually what worked was giving the younger adults a little more say in everything. But the vicious cycle is something that Jim and Monty mentioned about getting people together. Adam Klein's biggest challenge when he started running American Underground, it was the investors didn't want to come to the networking events because there weren't any really promising companies that were trying to get in the investment game, and the startups wouldn't come because the investors weren't there. And so Adam had to try to figure out how to create an event that would get both of them there. And it required a lot of individual conversations saying, if I can get one or two, will you come, and can, in both directions, and really grew it from there. Well, once that started happening, now everybody comes because both parties know there'll be enough of those people they want to talk to that are going to be there. And then everybody else's, including the small businesses, get the benefit of being around a lot of deal flow and at least conversation about, opportunity. So what I try to do in my coaching with other communities is help them copy what worked in Durham and some other places where they figured it out eventually, and skip a lot of the steps of figuring it out and just copy the success and get the right ingredients and leadership team in place. So my 100 days of focus on local business, part of what I'm recruiting is scouts that are being the eyes and ears in your community that collectively know everybody in the community. That means they've got to be pretty diverse and cover all the sectors, but we're not going to bug them with long meetings and bureaucracy. They're going to be with us for about 100 days as facilitators of getting the entrepreneurs plugged into what's going on, including some listening, focus groups and surveys and whatnot. I only do meetings when I have a lot of data to share. I never convene people for no reason. And so I do a lot of homework before I even get to a strategy retreat. And then the strategy retreat is the day you develop the 100-day plan. And I stick with you through the 100 days and then celebrate the outcomes at the end with some, lots of, metrics like these other two we're talking about, where you get them to cash flow, or you get them to break even, or you get them to a conversation with, if it's a small business, it might be a lender. They may never need an investor if they're credit worthy and they have revenue and cash flow from customers, and all they need is a little bit of a loan to pay their team that they need to keep the cash flow rolling. So what I do, what the 100 days of action results in, it really varies. Sometimes it's a sectoral strategy around anything from aerospace to biotech, to get the people that have an opportunity plugged into the resources and the supply chains around them. It could be, in the case of artisans, I've helped an American Indian artists set up their own online store, because what they really want to do is make more stuff and be in their studios. They don't really want to go to trade shows and set up tables and hope they get customers and be away from their families. And so an online store was a win-win. They also didn't want to build websites, but they wanted an online presence. So one store sells them all. But that came out of some strategic planning in the Indian communities, that was a common need among their artists. So we put together a project, went after some commerce money in rural development in our state, and funded a demonstration grant where we basically built the store. And then, because I know a lot of people like you guys, I hired a team to be beta testers and try out the store before it went public and get some really good feedback to help the artists build an even more compelling, page for themselves and their products. And we asked all kinds of questions of our beta testers about pricing, about, what else, if they made it, you might buy, and, contacts you have for them in different places, and whatever. So yeah, I love to help the community decide something that makes sense given what's already got momentum in their community, and enjoy kind of working 100 days at a time, because what I've seen, and Jim's seen some of them too, these long processes that take like a year and a half, certified entrepreneurial community, there's a few others, and I think they're really solid programs, but it's so hard to get communities to buy in. It sounds like a lot of meetings, it sounds like a lot of volunteer time, and I want to kind of do the opposite, which is help you a quarter at a time, which is about what executives can sometimes even see, as a commitment. And before the 100 days is over, you've already transitioned the leadership team to the next group that's going to take it into the the next phase. So that's what I do, and I love working with lots of different size communities. I was in Chattanooga in 2002 under some Kauffman funding that eventually got pulled the plug on, but got to spend a week in the region, and would really love to see it again. It's just like incredible what's happened since then. And it's one of those mountain communities that's a little bit like Asheville, where everybody wants to go there, but can everybody be employed and live and work and play there?
So that's a great segue, because we do have tremendous natural beauty here. We've got the mountains. We have 23 miles of the Tennessee River that flows right through the middle of town. But we really have two different economies. We are a city of the haves and the have-nots. Some of us are doing quite well, while others of us are not doing well at all. So you've mentioned that you have an inside-out strategy, and you've talked about community. Can you tell us a little bit, Leslie? And I would also like to hear from Jim and Margaret about this. How do you encourage, or how do you bring other communities into these ecosystems so that everyone is benefiting? It's not just benefiting a few, it's benefiting all of a city or all of an ecosystem. Leslie, why don't you go first?
So what I do is, when I strongly advise the formation of the leadership team that's going to be there for the strategy retreat. And I don't really let the community just pick who's going to be there. I say, I want to see this kind of person. So I want to see if you have a diverse community racially, I want the people on your leadership team to reflect that. And so I love finding some people from the faith community. I've had really good luck with African American outreach when I get a pastor on board, who actually, a lot of them have their own small business and side gigs going on as it is, and they have credibility with congregations. I kid you not, east of Charlotte, several years back, the African American Preachers Alliance put on an entrepreneur revival. And they got the white tents like it was a wedding. They had a big old event that was mostly outside at one of their churches with lots of parking. And it was everything from a street fair for people that had something to sell to services, set up a table, do a curbside consulting. They basically put on a small business fair that they called an entrepreneur revival, and they had some speakers, including the preacher, talking about God wants us to be successful, and tied it all in. So I mean, I love having the faith community involved, because a lot of times, to be honest, those are some of the people that have a lot of people asking them questions about, where do I go for help with my small business, or I have an idea, or I've been working on something in my garage. If they're not plugged into the paid resources for small business development, a lot of those people are never going to find the handles to get up on the ladder. And so I like to have, always in a community with any kind of Hispanic population, the Catholic Church needs to be involved. I learned that in my work in Danville, that if you put on a small business workshop in the Catholic Church in one of their classrooms, not only does everybody turn out, but they have a Spanish translator on staff who comes to everything. They have childcare built in, because they're used to doing childcare whenever their families need it, so that they can get plugged into resources. And so I'm going beyond what we might otherwise call the usual suspects. I always want the university partners, but I also want the people that know people that are never going to come to something that's at the university. One thing we learned when I ran, I was in an office that I shared with a lady that ran a microloan program when I worked at the Rural Center. And she ended up finding out that the 2-stop trip was the best way to do outreach. In the same community, she would have the how to get to yes with the bank workshop, which was pretty much a credit repair, be smart with your money, get your ducks in a row before you ask for money at a bank. That was the topic of the workshop. she'd have it at the community college and get 5 or 6 people. And then she'd have it down the road at the YMCA or the public library or the church basement, and she'd get 5 or 6 or 10 more people and completely different people. And if she had it at just one or the other, she'd completely miss out on that segment of the population that, as we call it, the people that don't want to park in a college parking lot. And they're not going to come no matter what the topic is if it's there. So when I say, like, if we do a inside out approach to a community, I want the people that know everybody in the neighborhoods that are kind of getting left behind now, because they're going to be the gatekeepers that help everybody that they're, that they care about get plugged in. And without them, that's not going to happen. I've created fireworks in places like Fayetteville, North Carolina, where I made the very white head of the chamber be on the same leadership team with the lady that ran the Women's Business Center and the lady that basically had been homeless and went on to start a business. He didn't want to be on the same leadership team with her either, but I thought she had a really compelling story to tell that was important for thinking about, creating a pathway for others to pursue entrepreneurship. So I go, there's a lot more attention in North Carolina right now with a new investment from Brian Hamilton in focuses on ex-offenders. There's resources and programs specifically for people coming out of prison that want to start a business. And so I don't try to specialize as much as point people to some of these programs that are within specific niches. And
you've given me
Jim and Margaret are two of them.
For sure. I may have to borrow the entrepreneurial revival concept to be sure. Jim, can you tell us a little bit about diversity in the Wilmington startup ecosystem, and what are you guys doing to make sure that you have broad participation?
So one thing that we do is all of our events are free. They are free and open to the public. We have it at a brewery. We do not charge anything. The brewery lets us have the room for free because they get to sell a lot of beer. When I moved to Wilmington, I was the first director of the university incubator, and an African-American professor approached me and said, "Hey, I have this facial recognition software. I think I really have something, but I need to find some investors." And I found a gentleman who was on the board of the business school, and this professor worked within that business school, but they had never met. And so I simply went to a lunch with this investor and told him about the company. And the next day we made a trip over to the professor's lab, and between the two of them, they raised $3 million for this African-American professor and his company. And since then they have raised another $3 million, including the investment arm of Aflac Insurance made an investment. As I joke, I don't know that the duck wrote the check, but Aflac wrote the check. The third way is we have a new entrepreneur co-working space that opened just this week called Genesis Block. And they took an old building that had not been used for a while and really kind of spiffed it up. And it is now a brand new co-working space for minority entrepreneurs. And I will do everything. He and I have actually written a grant application to help fund his programming within the co-working space. So those are 3 examples that I could share.
Is that co-working space in the heart of downtown, or is it in the African-American community? Where is it located?
Right downtown, 1 block from the river.
Okay. A lot of our problems here tend to be what I term field of dreams problems. We build it, but then not everyone comes. And so we have a lot of conversation about how maybe we should decentralize our efforts and build a little more infrastructure in neighborhoods outside of downtown. I mean, what has your history been in Wilmington around that issue?
Well, the university incubator, I wouldn't say is in a great location because there's no, I would say there's no live, work, play within that area. So your entrepreneurs, actually the magic are around events, but the real magic is the after party where people go. So we don't serve food at our events, but we have our events at 4 o'clock in the afternoon so parents can attend. Mm-hmm. And then they can choose where to go after our event. And some may go home, but a couple of us get together after the event and we have dinner. We have the keynote speaker from our event and probably maybe 6 to a dozen entrepreneurs who join us after the event. Mm-hmm. And that's really where the magic happens, is because those are the hungry entrepreneurs that want a little more information and they dig a little deeper. And it proves to me that they're hungry and they're looking for help. And they dig into what the guest speaker said on stage. They're not repeating the conversation. They're saying, I heard you say these 3 things and I'd like a little more information. And we've actually had investments come from the after party dinner, where the entrepreneur came to dinner, met with the speaker who happened to be an investor, and the magic happened and somebody wrote a check, or somebody becomes a full-time mentor because of how good the conversation was at the after dinner. And so those are some things that I could share with you.
So do you have a recipe or a secret sauce for the composition of the people in the room? How do you get the right people in the room so that chemistry that you just described happens?
Point number 1, and this is very important, is in Charlotte, when I started this, I had an 80-20 rule where 80% of the people in the room had to be entrepreneurs. They can't be all law firms, the aggressive law firms that bug your entrepreneurs during the event trying to get their business. Mm-hmm. It needs to be 80% entrepreneurs. But again, everyone you need needs to be in the room. So it needs to be the entrepreneurs, it needs to be the investors, it needs to be the professional service providers, and it needs to be the media. The media needs to come to these events and start writing about what's happening, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the people who didn't come to your event start reading about it. And one of my keys, the magic sauce, is FOMO, the fear of missing out. You want to have, if I can take a second, your events have to be so good that they ignore the other 3 options that they have. They can stay at the office, they can go home to their families, which they should do, or they can go to the bar with their buddies and watch Thursday night football and Monday night football, or whatever big game is that night, or they can come to your event. And your event has to be the best of those 4 options, if that makes sense. So how do you create great events? And most of it, it's around how do you bring the resources that they need? How do you find more money from investors, from grants, and sales? So can you have events on sales where if they learn 3 new tricks that they can incorporate those insights the next day in their business? And that's how you create great events.
I like that. So Margaret, I want you to talk a little bit about how CCE reaches out into the community and provides an inclusive environment. And then I'm going to come back and I want each of you to maybe just make a short closing statement, something that you want to make sure that we all hear this morning. So Margaret, tell us about CCE and how you reach out.
Well, thank you, Monty. We have actually make sure in our messaging and in our marketing that we are being very inclusive and welcoming. And because of that, we have an amazing diversity. Over this year, our accelerator was 50% women and 50% minorities, people of color. But over our history of doing this, we have about 70% women and 45 to 50% people of color. So our messaging is I think is key in that you're being very inclusive and welcoming. But now, because of the changes in our climate and in our country, so I guess what I'm saying is we're very authentic in the way we market and deliver our programs, but now we want to be more intentional. And we have actually started researching and getting funding so that we can be very inclusive with our programs going forward. And we are going to have a strong focus on people of color and women coming into our boot camp, which is the Kinetic Boot Camp, the 4-week boot camp. And we have received some wonderful funding from the Truist Foundation to help support the Kinetic Boot Camp in 2021. And it can be accessed from anywhere. So you're entrepreneurs in Chattanooga, Wilmington, Durham, all over the country. In fact, we do have someone from Berlin, a company from Berlin in our current boot camp. So it's possible to work with us from anywhere. And we're not trying to drive your entrepreneurs to Winston, but we want to be supportive if they need the information. The other thing we're doing is working intentionally with some other organizations in our community that reach into a diverse profile, and that's Hustle Winston-Salem. They focus very much on women and minorities. They are run by a group of African-American women and men, but mainly women, who have weekly meetups, talk about how to run your programs, and they help us market, and they're going to be working with us more closely as we hone in on this new focus. Well, it's not a new focus, but we more intentionally focus. We are also more intentionally focusing our board. We're bringing more diversity onto our board, and we're just making sure that we are walking the walk and talking the talk. There's another organization in Winston-Salem called the Access Center, which helps women and minorities to access capital and helps them with contracts, government contracts, and that type of thing, making sure they understand all the ins and outs of how to do that. And we collaborate with them a little bit, but I just wanted to shout out to them because they're providing a great service. And we host our events, and I've got a lot of good information from Jim. I love that 80-20 rule. I would like to try to put that in place and have the media there. That's a great idea. We sometimes have the media at our events, but not all. So I think that's just another thing that we need to work on.
Monty's on mute.
Leslie, any last words?
Well, I guess as the Thanksgiving and Christmas shopping season is upon us, I would encourage people to shop their local small businesses. It used to be Walmart that was putting small businesses out of business. Now it's Amazon. And there are people that are making their small businesses thrive because they're using Amazon. But I guess when I saw the competing ecosystems to Durham, which include Austin, Boston, and Silicon Valley, they all have a really codependent, in a good way, relationship interdependent between the tech entrepreneurs and the local small businesses that run the restaurants, the bars, the coffee shops, the movie theaters, the museums, everything else that's going on in that community that makes it the place they want to live and play, and not just the place that they work. And so if those people are all working from home, those small businesses don't have any customers. And so somehow these communities are going to need to figure out, maybe they all need a phone app way to sell their merchandise online. And we need to pair the tech entrepreneurs up with the retailers. But I think there's more of a really good ecosystem conversation where they're both important. And if you look at our competing regions, they have both of those pretty well taken care of. And because the quality of life is what gets the tech entrepreneurs to want to live there. So maybe the tech entrepreneurs need to take all that good broadband access and help some of their local small businesses get through the hump of at least trying to sell online while there's a pandemic and everybody's waiting on a vaccine.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Jim, I will let you wrap up, and then I just want to open it up for just a brief Q&A, because I'm sure there are people who have questions for everybody.
So the thing that I would like to get across is your ecosystem, two things. One, if you're a mentor, ask the entrepreneur if they had the magic wand, what are 3 things they would need tomorrow to improve their business? And that's how I work, is in groups of 3. So tell me 3 things you need. We'll meet again in 3 weeks or a month, and you tell me 3 more things, and we walk down that way. The other thing that I would say is, the people that are working with your entrepreneurs need to understand 3 things. They need to work at the same pace. They need to have the same energy level, and they need to speak the tone of the entrepreneurs. You know, entrepreneurs tend to speak in 4-letter words, and I'm one of those too. But you cannot slow down your entrepreneurs if you don't work at the same pace, because then they're going to see you as a speed bump. And if you don't bring the energy to your events, then the entrepreneurs won't come. They're tired at the end of their workday. If you're having events at the end of the day, your entrepreneurs need high energy events, or they're not going to come, because they don't need a nap at the end of the day. They need some boost in their knowledge and their energy. And that's what I would leave you with today.
Wow, that's awesome. I like that a lot. Talitha, can we bring everybody in and open this up for Q&A?
Absolutely. Does anyone have a question they'd like to speak out right now?
I have a quick shout out and question, if that's okay. First off, just wanted to thank you, Monty, for putting this together. I moved to Chattanooga in 2013 to be a part of a funded technology startup. And ever since then, you've been such a voice in the community for promoting entrepreneurship and thinking of creative ways to help small businesses. So just wanted to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
The agency that I have now, called Startup Champs, we work with clients worldwide, mostly high net worth individuals to large companies, helping them get sales before launching new companies. I traveled 6 continents last year and asked a lot of, while I was doing client work and also speaking engagements, but talked to a lot of entrepreneurial ecosystem leaders like you all, and asked, what are the challenges you all are facing? It came down to 3 things. The seed stage capital is drying up. People in our community don't have their own personal capital. And 3, when they do get personal capital, they're not exactly sure how to get things done in the right order. And so they get bombarded with just focusing on getting things done. And then that leads to stress. So I've been really interested not only identifying that theme and that trend internationally, as more communities are sort of stepping away from the Silicon Valley model and more towards this notion of community wealth building through a variety of different ways. You know, people are building wealth through real estate, through investing, through reselling, through finding creative ways to advance their careers for more take-home pay. That would be my question to the panel is, have you all been seeing examples of focusing on the individual wealth building first, and then focusing on companies second, in both your own communities and other communities across the country?
Thanks, Alex.
That's not really something that we have focused on. We live in a very interesting place in Wilmington with the have and have nots, like Monty has talked about. As I'm not too subtle, I say you're either a boat owner or you work for a boat owner in Wilmington. And I'm not a boat owner, but I'm trying to, I'm trying to make a living as well, trying to help these entrepreneurs. So we certainly recommend, sometimes I'll tell people they have an ugly baby where I don't like their startup idea. And then you say, you either need to pivot this idea or you need to go get a better job to maybe make some money, learn some new skills, and then try to restart as an entrepreneur. But I'm not shy in saying you have an ugly baby and that's not going to work, because I don't want you to waste 3 to 6 to 9 months of your life trying to build a startup that has no chance of success.
That's a really good point, Jim. And I would say where we come out in that regard is really focusing on customers with the people that we work with in our boot camp, and helping them do a lot of customer discovery before they even launch their business. Most of the companies that we work with do not have personal capital before they are having this idea. But they do have friends, families, FFF, friends, families, and fools that they can access capital from. We are in the very early stages here, and I've been in some discussions recently about trying to come up with more capital funds in Winston-Salem. I mean, there are funds being developed all the time, and I think we're going to have in the next 2 or 3 years more funding available. I think another problem is the ecosystem leaders like Jim and I and Leslie as an integral part of the development of ecosystems. We all are searching for the funding to keep our programs going too. So there's a real need to not only fund the startups, but to support the ecosystems that are doing the programs too. So it's kind of it's a circle. And we're providing that bridge to help them be successful. I hope we answered your question. I'm not sure if we did.
Kind of. I appreciate your all's responses. I think it's something we're all working toward. I know a lot of, so I've been on both sides of the fence. I worked with a nonprofit here in town called the Company Lab. We worked with anyone who walked into the door. The challenge, though, of course, was that everyone was looking for free because they just didn't have any money. They needed free help with everything. Now I'm in the private sector. Most of my contracts go for $25,000, $50,000 and up. And, and we've helped clients secure not customer discovery, but customer acquisition, actually getting the deposit or the pre-order or the sale locked in before that company gets launched, and anywhere up to $100,000 to as much as $10 million for a manufacturing startup outside of Chicago, making commercial grade scuba equipment. That kind of money is something that people just don't have. And unless, typically they're high net worth individuals. And so when people come up to me and they say, how can we work with you? I say, really, the best thing to do is to figure out, how can we continue to build a community that celebrates entrepreneurship at all levels, wealth building at all levels, so that everyone can have a chance to get access to the latest in consumer psychology and market research tools and design thinking and all the other resources and skill sets that are required out there in order to get that acquisition done correctly.
Hey, Monty, can I come from a different angle on this? There's an event that I have called my Aspirin event. And what I bring the 5 largest employers of the region, and I come and have them explain on stage 5 big pain points in their industry. And then at the end of the event, you have 25 new opportunities for the entrepreneurs in the room to sell something into those industries, which, because they're the 5 biggest companies, they have resources to become the clients of the entrepreneurs. And so this is an easy way to kick off an ecosystem by saying, here are 5 big companies. They're all listing 5 big problems, not that they have, but that the industry has. Because the reason that's important is because if a hospital in Chattanooga has the problem, you can bet our hospital in Wilmington has a very similar problem that the entrepreneur can attack as well. So it's not just selling locally, but to scale a company, you have to sell outside of the region. And so that is, in the past, served as a very effective way to attack the problem that we're talking about.
So that would be a variation of a reverse pitch, if you will.
Correct.
Right.
I just like the pain aspirin reference. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I would just like to follow up on that, in that what I've noticed is that a lot of our mentors get really interested in the startups that they're working with, and they do get interested in potentially investing, but they don't really have, there's not a lot of history in how to go about investing and what makes a good investment. And we have a lot of potential in the high net worth individuals in our community, and probably communities in Chattanooga, that could be potentially really good investors, but don't know where to start. And so I would say I mean, I even have people on my board, they're like, I'm kind of interested in that, but I just don't know if I should take the plunge. So that's some, I think, education that we all need to provide or to access. And then the other thing I wanted to say about the startups and the free thing, because I run a nonprofit, so I cannot offer my programs for free. And now we work so much in the diversity and inclusion market. So I've been doing a lot of research with the leaders in those communities, and I say, well, I've gotten some funding that we could provide scholarships, and they say, great, but don't give it away. Make sure they have some skin in the game. And so we're taking that advice, because if you offer your program totally for free, then it's not then valued as highly. And that comes directly from my people of color partners that I'm working with. So, and because I mean, that's just how you have to stay in business. And the entrepreneurs can't offer their programs for free, so neither can the ecosystem partners either.
Another
Curious
way you can
about-
get the diversity of your community involved is get the CDFIs, the Community Development Financial Institutions. They tend to be pretty plugged into the lower income market, but they also have access to some of the federal dollars that the banks can too. But the CDFIs don't have to run like banks, so they actually can lend in the most low income neighborhoods, be totally in compliance with Community Reinvestment Act. And in North Carolina, there's some of the recipients of the ecosystem investment grants that NCIDEA Foundation has made recently. In North Carolina, it's Thread Capital and Carolina Small Business Development Fund are both really big CDFIs that are statewide now. And I'm sure Tennessee has a couple of them too. They need to be involved in those capital conversations, because they have some really flexible dollars that nobody really knows about.
That's a good idea for sure. Well, listen, we've gone a little bit over, but I think it's been a great conversation. I want to thank Jim Roberts, Margaret Collins, and Leslie Scott for joining us this morning. And I hope you guys will come to Chattanooga soon. I would love to show you some good Chattanooga hospitality, and look forward to getting over to visit you as well. So we're going to wrap up now, and thank you so much. And everyone, just have a great day.
Thank you, Monty. Appreciate your inviting us.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Take care,
Thanks,
guys.
Monty. Good to